Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. There we go. All right, let me close the door. Let's get started, chat. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanoja. I'm a psychiatrist practicing in Boston. Just a reminder that everything we do on stream is intended to be for educational purposes, and nothing is intended to be taken as medical advice. So if y'all have a medical concern or question, please go see a licensed professional and get yourself some help. So a couple of quick announcements, and then we're going to kind of get into things. So first is we're going to try something different today, okay? So we have a coaching program at Healthy Gamer, and I think it's going relatively well. The initial data from about 1 year's worth of coaching is like quite promising. We're in the process of tabulating those results, and we'll hopefully be we're actually doing an IRB approved trial right now on coaching. And so once those results kind of get tabulated and stuff, we'll kind of put them together and hopefully publish them in a peer-reviewed research journal. So, coaching is going well. And at the same time, we frequently offer additional curriculums for our coaches to kind of go through to enhance their skills as a coach. I think part of the reason that our coaching does go so well is because we're sort of in this process of like continuous improvement and feedback. And so we've also gotten a lot of interest recently in people like wanting to be a coach. So a lot of people are asking, how do I become a coach? Things like that. I think we've also found that a lot of coaches do grow personally, like in the process of becoming a coach and helping people work through their issues and kind of working on themselves some and dealing with their own insecurities. Like, is it possible that I can actually help another human being? And so what we actually have decided to do is share a piece of the training that we're going to do with our coaches. So a big thing that we're improving in our coaching program is helping coaches understand goal setting and motivation. So this is going to be a little bit different, but for the next 4 days, we're actually going to be like live streaming a coach teaching seminar on goal setting and motivation. And so it's going to be like somewhat theoretical. Like hopefully if you watch it, you'll be able to understand, a little bit about how we understand motivation and some of these fundamentals. But just to be clear, this is not designed to be like a standalone thing that is geared towards the audience or clients. It's for people who are helping other people figure out how to create motivation. So I know it's kind of weird. It's not going to be geared towards y'all, right? We're just going to live stream it because I think it definitely could be beneficial to y'all. So I'll explain a lot of my fundamental understanding of how motivation works and how to set appropriate goals. I think a lot of this stuff you guys can do on your own. We'll be explaining a little bit of neuroscience and psychology and stuff like that, but it is sort of geared towards the coaches. So I hope that's kind of clear, and I hope that's okay, and we'll try it, right? So we try different things at Healthy Gamer. Some things people like, some things people don't like. And so we're just going to try this thing because a lot of people seem to be curious about more about coaching and how you become a coach and what we teach coaches and things like that. So a couple of things in relation to that. So we do have coaching spots that are starting to fill up. So we're training another batch of about 20 coaches that will launch on September 20th. There's some promotional pricing going on right now between September 8th and September 20th. So if y'all want to get into coaching, and if you guys are curious about what it is, I guess watch this training because I'm sure some of that will become clear. And so you can also book into the future now. So this is an interesting platform thing that we've added recently where part of the problem was that we had 1,000 people on the wait list and you'd basically have to we'd email you when spots opened up and you'd have to check back. But now what you can do is actually book into the future. So you don't have to book for spots that are available right now. I know we're getting better in terms of building a platform and stuff like that. And so there's a 20% off for your coaching bundle right now. So y'all can go ahead and let me show you this link real quick. And if y'all are curious about, what coaching is and what we do, we're just watch, we'll explain it. I think hopefully by showing the training, y'all will start to see a little bit about what coaching is and what they're trained to do. The next thing is that we're doing Q&As with Healthy Gamer coaches on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4:30 p.m. Is this week or next week? I'm not quite sure. It says next week, but it may be this week. We'll get back to y'all on that. So for people, so these are Q&As where a lot of people are curious about like whether it's, whether coaching is appropriate for them or not. And so that's just, we'll kind of, you guys can show up on Discord. I'm sorry, I'm multitasking. Y'all can show up on Discord. There are questions, there are just coaches around that you can ask, hey, I've got this problem. Like, do you think, oh God, do you think that that's something that we can kind of, is this something appropriate for coaching or not? Okay. Does that work, chat? I'm eager to start teaching. Let's get into it. Where's my... Hold on. I gotta grab one more thing. Okay, so now you guys get to see something that's kind of neat in a sense, because I'm going to teach. And my favorite thing to do is teach. And one of the things that I really dislike about stream is that like, it's hard to kind of live interact with like 1,000 people on the internet. So I'm really looking forward to today. So let's go ahead and start by checking in with our coaches. Are y'all here? Y'all ready to go? Oh no, I'm muted. Muted. Testing 1, 2, 3. Can y'all hear me?
Yep. Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So, okay. So let's see who we got here. So what we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and turn on. Okay, you guys can see my face. Who's in here? So we're not going to show the meeting. Okay. So it looks like we've got a nice number of people. Okay, so a couple of ground rules, folks, okay? So first of all, everyone's aware that this is being streamed. Is that right?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So I may refer to y'all. So I'm not going to show anyone's face. Y'all are welcome to go on camera if you want to, but I have the meeting in a separate window, which hopefully won't get leaked. If you guys want to turn on cams, you're welcome to. If you don't want to turn on cams, that's totally fine. I want y'all to treat this just like any other, teaching or seminar or anything that we do here at HG. In terms of y'all are welcome to jump in and ask questions. We can meme a little bit. It's not a big deal. But hopefully like the only thing that will be revealed, I may refer to y'all by first name because that'll be tricky for me to not do. And if anyone, has an issue with that, just, I guess, change your name in the meeting, and then I'll try to refer to you that way. And then, hopefully we'll learn something, and, but otherwise it's just me, right? Y'all, are we cool with that?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
awesome. Okay. So let's go ahead and start out. So I think what we're going to do over the next 4 days is I'm going to teach y'all a little bit about how I understand goal setting and motivation. And so a quick outline of kind of the talk, the talks over the next couple of days. So on the first day, we're going to do an introduction. So we'll kind of do a quick overview. We'll understand some basics about goal setting and motivation. And we'll also understand a little bit about the difference between coaching and therapy. So this is a very common question that I get from coaches. Y'all know if you've been to case reviews and stuff, and clients, where they'll basically ask like, hey, is this something I'm supposed to be talking about you with, or something I should be talking to my therapist about? So we're going to start by actually like showing y'all some information about like coaching and therapy, and then we'll sort of figure out together what's appropriate for coaching and what's appropriate for therapy. I think as we sort of figure out the difference between the two, then we'll sort of naturally segue into goal setting and motivation. So we're going to talk today about like the introductory, like the model that we're going to use for understanding our clients' behaviors and why they have trouble doing the things that they want to do. And that model basically has 3 or 4 key points. The first is that, so if you start in Sanskrit, so Sanskrit has no word for motivation, which is kind of interesting. So Sanskrit tends to be a pretty nuanced language when it comes to like understanding internal states of things, right? So they have, for example, the word meditation gets translated into like 3 or 4 or even 5 different words in Sanskrit. So it's kind of like Eskimos have 100 words for snow. And the reason for that is because they like understand all the different nuances of it. So I always thought it was strange, and this, I could be wrong here. Maybe someone will post in chat or something that, oh, there is a Sanskrit word of motivation, you noob. But it's been my experience that when you like look at the yogic perspective on motivation, that like it's actually much more nuanced than that. And so that's what we're going to share with y'all today. So the reason that there isn't a Sanskrit word for motivation is because motivation is essentially an umbrella term. And so it's like, there are a lot of different things that fall under motivation. There are things that I should do, things that I need to do, things that I want to do. All of those may create different kinds of motivation. So we're going to kind of explain that a little bit. Then we're going to go into the three main components of motivation, which are intent, resistance, and action. And as a coach, we're going to try to help you all figure out how can you help a client with each of those things. And the reason that I think this model is important is because when we use the umbrella term of motivation, and then someone, let's say like there's a YouTube video about like, how to find your inner motivation, which we've made those, right? We're guilty of that kind of stuff. And I think the problem is that like we have so many resources for like how to improve your motivation. And we have a generation of people that is at the lowest motivation ever. So we're going to explore a little bit about like why that is. Why is it that we have so much of an abundance of information and yet people aren't able to change their lives? And so part of that, I think, is because of, a big thing that we say at Healthy Gamer, which is good diagnosis precedes good treatment, even though we're not really providing treatment. And that understanding a client and a problem is like really the first step. And I think basically what's happening with a generation of people is that people are not accurately diagnosing where their motivational problem is. And the reason for that is because they say, oh, I have a problem with motivation. But like motivation is actually like an umbrella term that covers all these different kinds of thought processes and issues that we're going to cover, okay? And so we're going to go with the overview today, and then we're going to spend one day on intent, one day on resistance, and one day on action. And then we'll give y'all, in terms of the manual and things like that, we'll give y'all a bunch of exercises and useful questions and things like that to ask. Any questions about that? Okay, great. So we're going to start actually by talking a little bit about how coaching is different from therapy. So if a client comes to you and asks, is this something that I should talk to a coach about or something that I should talk to a therapist about? How would y'all go about answering, like, how do you decide, like, whether something is appropriate for you to discuss with, with a client? Like, how do y'all know what is appropriate for coaching or what is appropriate for therapy? How do y'all think about that?
Whether it involves diagnosis.
Okay. So, Jake, help me understand, like, why that's important.
I can't diagnose anything, and if there's a clinical illness there, then that's just kind of out of my skill set.
Okay. All right. What do other people think?
I draw that line kind of at the, we can talk about it in both, honestly. But it's what we work on that's different. So in coaching, we work on awareness, like becoming more familiar with whatever the issue is, getting more information about it. And then therapy would be more treatment of the issue and kind of direct response to whatever's going on.
Okay, great. So all right. So I think that's a good perspective as well, that like you can talk about it in coaching, but that treatment or therapy has a particular direction. Anyone else have ideas?
For me, it's when I get the like certain sentiment when we're talking about like specific like mental health like issues, and we start actually using like medical terms, and then when I get the sentiment that they're like looking for me to like answer that or like come up with a actual like solution to like a specific mental health issue, that's when I usually start that conversation with the client.
Okay. So let me ask y'all a question. So like, if we can't diagnose and treat medical conditions, what do we do? Like, how do we help people?
We help them understand themselves more, to sort of take agency or control over their mental health. But in a way, through coaching is through creating something good from it.
Okay. Other people have thoughts? Thanks, Kent.
Yeah, I think one thing that we definitely do is like emotional awareness, like helping them become aware of like their emotional state, how that gets in the way of like what they want to do.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good way to put it. So what we're going to do, so this is these are the opinions of you as coaches, right? So what we're going to do is take a step back from y'all's opinions, which I'll summarize in a second. We're actually going to look at different organizations and like different pieces of data from therapy and coaching, and we'll sort of let y'all kind of see whether your answer is right or wrong, okay? So what I'm hearing, first of all, is that we're not, licensed mental health professionals that are we're not able to diagnose and treat particular medical conditions or any medical conditions, which I agree with 100%. And at the same time, the reason that we talk about things like, let's say, anxiety or like, whatever negative emotions you have is to raise awareness of them. And once you have awareness of them, you can actually use that information or understanding to succeed in whatever goals or targets you set for yourself. Is that fair to say? Right? So we're about increasing understanding, but for the purpose of application. So the first thing that host is disabled screen sharing. Okay. Can we screen share, please? So what I'm going to do now is we're going to actually take a look, so y'all can look at this with me. So we're actually going to look at some of these sources. Let me see if I can. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. So you guys can see this now? All right. Good. All right. So what we're going to actually do is there's this organization called the International Coaching Federation, and we're actually going to just look through the list of like what the core competencies for ICF coaches are. So the ICF basically got together and said, how do we know if a coach is good at their job? And these are the 11 things that they came up with, okay? So the first is like setting a foundation. So this is meeting ethical guidelines and professional standards, establishing a coaching agreement. So these two things will be pretty similar to therapy, as we'll see. Like it's sort of, we have certain ethical responsibilities that we adhere to. I think y'all understand this very well. Things like privacy and stuff like that, mandatory reporting, all that kind of stuff falls into here. So co-creating the relationship, so establishing trust and intimacy with the client, the ability to create a safe, supportive environment that produces ongoing mutual respect and trust. I think this also makes a lot of sense. Coaching presence, the ability to be fully conscious and create spontaneous relationship with a client, employing a style that is open, flexible, and confident. Where we want to be present, flexible. It's all this kind of like, feel good coaching presence. Like, oh man, like using his humor to create a lightness and energy. Like, that's great. It's like all this like, okay, fine. Like, what is this? Like, how does this help anyone? Okay, so this is like the early stuff. Okay, we'll get to interesting things. So now we get to number 5, which is active listening. So this is where, we train y'all to be like very active listeners to, pick up on things that clients may not understand themselves. Also overlaps a lot with what you see in therapy training, right? So therapists are also trained listeners. Powerful questioning. I think this also kind of it has overlap between coaching and therapy, where coaches are really good at, we try to be competent at asking important questions that sort of catalyze insight. Also very common in therapy, or necessary in therapy. So direct communication. So I'd say that all 3 of these things are like very similar in therapy, but we'll see that in a second, okay? So active listening, powerful questioning, and direct communication. Okay, so like all this is fine and all, but it's still kind of fluffy stuff, right? So why would you kind of go to a coach? And so this is where I think coaching and therapy really starts to differentiate, but y'all can judge yourselves. And then we get to number 8, which is creating awareness. So y'all have sort of said, we try to help our clients understand things. So the ability to integrate and accurately evaluate multiple sources of information and to make interpretations that help the client to gain awareness and thereby achieve agreed upon results. So this is sort of exactly what y'all were talking about earlier, right? So the goal of coaching is to increase awareness, and the goal of that is to leverage that increased understanding to help someone achieve what they want to in life. Designing actions. So this is the ability to create, work. I guess this is a grammatical error. The ability to work with a client to create opportunities for ongoing learning during coaching and in work-life situations, and for taking new actions that will most effectively lead to the agreed upon coaching results. So now we sort of start to see that a big part of coaching is like setting out kind of plans and designing actions that are tailored to the individual shortcomings, strengths, and weaknesses of a particular client. And then we get to planning and goal setting. So this is a core part. Like if we're talking about, the 11 things that coaches are supposed to do, a big part of it is understanding, designing actions, planning and goal setting, and then managing progress and accountability. So this is like another important thing, which is that coaches, oftentimes when clients come to us, we'll sort of set targets for them, or they'll set targets for themselves. And it's our job to kind of be there and sort of help them work through if they run into trouble or like what's going on. And eventually we want to get to the client to where their goal is. Okay, so that's coaching. I think that's, yeah. So those are the 11 things. Now let's take a look at therapy, okay? So this is the National Association of Social Workers. So social workers in the United States are the largest percentage of therapists. So the highest number of therapists in the US are actually clinical social workers. So let's see what they say about what therapy is. Okay, so they have these different standards, but that's a little bit different. It's not really what their practice is. Okay, so clinical social workers represent the largest group of behavioral health practitioners in the nation. They're often the first to diagnose and treat people with mental disorders and various emotional and behavioral disturbances. They are essential to a variety of client-centered settings, blah, blah, blah. Clinical social work has a primary focus on the mental, emotional, and behavioral well-being of individuals, couples, families, and groups. It centers on a holistic approach to psychotherapy and the client's relationship to his or her environment. Clinical social work views the client's relationship with his or her environment as essential to treatment planning. So I'm going to pause here for a second, and I'm just going to ask y'all, what do y'all see as the difference between the approach in coaching and the approach in clinical social work, if any? Or would y'all say that they're the same?
It kind of seems like in therapy, the social worker is kind of choosing what it is and kind of diagnosing what it is about the client's life that they feel like needs improvement. Whereas in coaching, it's more client-centered as far as what they want to work on.
Okay, that's a really good point. So I don't know that I'd entirely agree that coaching is more client-centered, but I would completely agree that generally speaking, therapists are working with a preconceived model of diagnosis and treatment. So the process that they go through, right? So if we kind of look at they're often the first to diagnose and treat people with mental disorders and various emotional and behavioral disturbances. That, clinical social work views the client's relationship with his or her environment as essential to treatment planning. So I'm with you there, that they definitely use a particular framework that they kind of slot people into. Other people have thoughts about, what's different, if anything?
I'm not saying this to be rude, but it almost sounds like it takes the human out of it.
Okay. Yeah, so I would say that that's just an unfair representation because we're kind of comparing apples and oranges here. Gotcha. In the sense that this is just the introduction to the document and we were far more detailed. So maybe the human will emerge. We'll actually look at a curriculum in a second and further that out. Other thoughts? Okay. So next thing that we're going to kind of look at is if we look at how a clinical social worker is trained, right? So these are the core competencies that ICF coaches are trained in, right? About designing actions, goal setting and planning, accountability. So, this is the important thing is that if you look at clinical social work, so it's state regulated, that's fantastic. Coaching is completely unregulated. Anyone can say, hey, I'm a coach and can start charging people for coaching. So I think what we see is there's a minimum of 2 years or 3,000 hours in a supervised clinical setting. So I think the key thing that I sort of notice here is that, clinical social work is clinical. So therapy is clinical in nature. And that's something that we've also talked about. And that if you kind of look at it, it's about treatment planning. It's about taking a holistic approach, absolutely, to the client and the relationship with their environment and things like that. But that overall, clinical social workers are trained in a model that's primarily clinical, focuses on diagnosis and treatment. So let's see if we kind of go down for a second and let's just look at the definition of clinical social work. So clinical social work is the professional application of social work theory and methods to the diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of psychosocial dysfunction, disability, or impairment, including emotional, mental, and behavioral disorders, right? So this is how the National Association of Social Workers defines therapy. And if you guys like look at this, what I kind of see is like the emphasis is on diagnosis and treatment of different kinds of disability, dysfunction. It doesn't necessarily have to include a diagnosis, right? So therapists don't have to work with people who only have diagnoses, but their goal is absolutely like treatment and prevention of particular kinds of dysfunction, disability, or mental disorder. If we kind of look at, psychotherapy. So psychotherapy is a specialized formal interaction between a social worker or other mental health professional and a client in which a therapeutic relationship is established in order to help resolve symptoms of a mental disorder, psychosocial stress, relationship problems, and difficulties in coping in the social environment. So then they'll kind of go into different options. And then they kind of define therapy as a systematic process designed to remedy, cure, or abate some disease, disability, or problem. So this is the key thing that I want y'all to understand. So if you look at the largest organization of therapists in the United States, the way they define therapy is a remedy, cure, a process designed to remedy, cure, or abate a disease, disability, or problem. And if we look at the core coaching competencies, what we see is that coaching is not necessarily about fixing something that's broken. It's about designing actions, setting goals, holding people accountable. So I think about, and this is kind of is a no-brainer when I sort of say it this way, but clinical work is about pathology, right? So like as a clinician, if you look at the training of social workers, if you look at the accreditation of social workers, if you look at therapists, medical doctors are even more so this way because we're even more medicalized than social workers. I think social workers in that way are far more holistic, pay attention to like relationships and environment and stuff way more than medical doctors do. But really the goal of coaching is I kind of think about it as moving forward, whereas opposed to, or building something new, as opposed to therapy, which I really think about is like focusing on pathology or fixing something that's broken. So the big difference for me in terms of whether someone is appropriate for coaching or someone is appropriate for therapy is like, what's the primary goal? Is the primary goal to fix something that's broken, or is it to actually achieve something and like have some kind of, even if there are things in the way? So I'll give you all kind of an example. So let's say like my goal is like, okay, I want to get rid of my depression because I feel depressed. So that's something that a clinician should do. Whereas if I want to, switch jobs, but I feel like burnout and depressed, if the goal is switching jobs, some amount of emotional awareness may be necessary as a coach to help them in achieving their goals. And that's kind of why we focus on awareness and understanding. It's not to fix the problem per se. In clinical treatment, treating depression is the end goal. Whereas in coaching, the reason that we work with, clients' depression and anxiety, we're not trying to treat it. It's a means to an end. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Okay. So if y'all want to, we can take a second to just look at like the actual curriculum and training of, an actual, psychology curriculum. So this is like a PsyD program. But if you kind of look at this, like, what are they trained in? So adult psychopathology, like development, assessment, like intelligence tests and things like that. History and systems of psychology, like psychopathology, like let's look at adult intervention 1, and let's just see what they say. So this is just a course that's not focused on psychopathology. So this course covers primary approaches to treating adult clinical problems, right? With an emphasis on treating adult Axis 1 disorders. So we can see that if you look at like PsyD curriculums and like PhD curriculums and therapy curriculums, like let's take a look at supervision. We'll kind of see what the focus here is. So let's read some of this. So students will prepare supervision by obtaining and utilizing data about current and historical formulation, behavioral assets, making excesses to make diagnostic determinations, treatment formulations, translating clinical questions. So administering, scoring, interpreting, and integrating reports from psychological testing results, providing consultation, by beginning to provide individual couples, family, and group treatment and evaluate the efficacy thereof, and it kind of goes on, right? So incorporating current empirical theoretical findings into assessment, treatment, and consultation. So if you kind of look at the training of a psychologist or a therapist, most of it is going to be like clinical in nature. So it's going to be focused on pathology, focusing on people who are like coming to clinics. So there are people who are, seeking medical treatment for some kind of thing. Now, a lot of psychologists will say, and I would agree with this, that or therapists will say that, oh, we don't just focus on the clinical stuff, we do non-clinical things as well, which makes perfect sense. We saw that in clinical social work definition, right? That they sort of do things that are not necessarily diagnosing and treating. But if you look at the training and perspective, it's all kind of focused on pathology. Like that's what the actual training is in. Whereas if you look at the training of coaching, it's really more about, goal setting, motivation, designing actions, supporting people to like achieve what they want to. Questions about that? Okay. So does that sort of help clarify? Because I think that we've had a lot of questions, from coaches about what's appropriate for therapy, what's appropriate for coaching. Do y'all have any remaining questions about that?
I'm kind of curious with like therapy and social work. It seems pretty clear when there's a successful case because there's like eradication of the diagnosis. I'm wondering about like with coaching, what's that like?
It's a great question. So I think that's where we'll get to that, especially on day 4. So this is where, like, remember that the goal of coaching is that you and your client will come up with a goal, right? And that like their progress towards the goal is going to be your measure of success. So that kind of goes to, I forget who it was that sort of said, it seems like, I think Kent was saying that like we're more like client focused and like, the clinical medicine is more like disease focused as opposed to person focused. And I think there's some element of that because essentially what's happened in therapy is like we've gotten together and we figured out a standardized measurement for people who fit into a particular label. So once we know that someone has depression, we know how to objectively track their depression. Whereas for coaching, the goals that we set are far more individual and tailored to clients. So I can kind of see what you mean there, but it's essentially like, you and the client will decide what the right goal is. Other questions? Okay, so we've got a question. Do you ever get coaches who in reality, they themselves should be the client? You'd be surprised at how many of our coaches have gone through coaching. We have actually a fair number that have been clients and are now coaches. Okay, so let's get on to the meat and bones of the training. All right. So the first thing that we're going to try to do is explain a little bit about how motivation, like how we can understand motivation. So if you look at motivation, there are actually a bunch of different disciplines that like will talk about motivation and behavior. So for example, there's neuroscience, there's psychology, there's even behavioral economics. There's spirituality, even like the system of psychotherapy has its own tradition about understanding motivation. There are also like these more novel approaches to motivation. So there's like the self-help section, right, of like the bookstore where people are sort of talking about personal experiences of motivation. And my most recent favorite one is like they're all the life hacks, right? So you have like in our society, when you look at motivation, there are a lot of different disciplines and approaches that people will take to actually like figuring out, okay, what is my motivation? Like, how does motivation work? Like, how do I fix this problem? So then the question becomes, okay, if we're coaches and we're here to help clients sort of fix this problem, how are we going to approach it? And so what we're going to start with, as we do with most things in Healthy Gamers, we're actually going to start with sort of the yogic approach. And then what we're going to do is sprinkle in, I think, key findings from psychology and neuroscience, and also some things from like psychotherapy and stuff. You'll find that a lot of this stuff is actually baked into the curriculums that y'all have already gone through, but we're going to kind of take a step back and think about it. So like I was saying earlier, there's no Sanskrit word for motivation because motivation is actually an umbrella term. So what do y'all think are the components of motivation? Like, what do you think determines whether someone is motivated or not?
Intrinsic value.
What does that mean?
When they sort of have a purpose that they care about, that they can work and commit towards working.
Okay. So a sense of value. What else? What do you think, like, what goes into, like, come on, like when y'all are motivated towards something or not motivated towards something, what goes into that?
Ease of
I would
access is a
say-
big one.
Oh, wow.
There we go.
4 people.
Let's start with Steven.
Ease of access is a big one. Like
Okay.
how likely am I to get that thing?
Okay. What else?
I was gonna say desire for the outcome.
Desire for the outcome, sure. Right? So there's like outcome orientation, there's like likelihood of success. Great.
How
What
you
else?
like feel about it, like your emotional like sort of attitude towards it.
Okay, your emotional attitude towards it, right? So let's say that all I have to do is go to class and I'll get the points for attendance, right? Likelihood of success is very high. And yet, my emotional attitude can keep me from going to class, right? Brian, what did you say? Can y'all hear him? Or is it just me?
Nope.
No.
We can't hear. it.
GG.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Hold on.
There you go.
Now we can.
Hey, Bogger.
Okay, yeah. What I was saying is like just like fulfilling a purpose or like a
Okay.
yeah. My analogy is like just like filling up a hole like that you just dug up or something like that. That's how I imagine.
Okay. Great.
Willingness to suffer.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, like, what level of tolerance do you have for going through whatever adversity you're going to have to go through for this goal, right? So,
Okay.
like, the adversity to getting a snack might be walking up the stairs. That's not a lot of adversity. I can go through that. But maybe to getting a PhD, the adversity is years of struggle and sacrificing having fun so I can study, and
Yeah.
that might be a lot more.
So spot on. So this is where crap, my iPad is pooping out. Hold on. Okay, so the first thing that I kind of want to point out is that if we look at motivation, y'all are coming up with like a lot of different things, right? There's like what's the likelihood of success? There's like how you feel about it, what the outcome is, how important it is to you. There are lots of different attributes that we can kind of think of when it comes to like what goes into motivation. So this is the first problem with motivation, is that when people say that they're unmotivated, they don't know like which of these things is the problem. You know, am I not engaging in the action because I believe that the likelihood of success is low? So let's take a step back for a second and imagine that I have an ahamkar that views me as a failure. Who wants to explain real quick for the people who are streaming what an ahamkar is?
The ego. It's the part
Okay.
of your mind that's trying to prevent you from, incurring any damage. It's trying to like, sort of ease you into like, or not really ease, but it's trying to protect you from anything that's like kind of unusual or uncomfortable or like, undesirable.
Yep. So if I have an identity or ego as a failure, what do you think that does to my calculation of the likelihood of success of taking an action?
It's gonna say that you're gonna fail, so don't do it in the first place.
Exactly, right? So like if we think about this as coaches, like this is kind of interesting because someone says, "Oh, I'm not motivated to do something." Whereas the reason they're not motivated is because the calculation in their mind sets the likelihood of success as very low, and therefore it's not worth doing. And so if we think about like this is kind of tricky because when this client comes in and they say, I want to find a romantic partner, but I can't because I'm ugly. Like, how would you work with that person as a coach?
Help them explore where they got the idea of how they are ugly and like what is
Perfect.
their perspective on that.
Perfect, right? So like this is the real challenge that we have as coaches, is that a lot of times what'll happen is that coaches will come in with a particular goal. But like if they want to find a romantic partner, and then what they'll do is they'll go to like pickup artists or like, whatever to learn particular skills. Whereas like that's the treatment that the solution that the client is coming up with is actually based on like a false formulation of where their problem is. So instead, like by understanding concepts like a humkar, and you sort of realize like, oh, the problem is like you can learn as many pickup skills as you want to, but as long as you are, asking someone out and you feel like you're not worth dating and that you're a failure, that's going to come across as unattractive, become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and then like, they'll reject you. Oh, I'm more of a failure. And the next person that you ask out, you're kind of like exuding that like loser musk, right? And that makes you like less attractive. And then you kind of fail again. And so what we try to do in coaching is once we understand, oh, this is actually a problem of a humkar where they think going into the interaction that they're doomed to failure. So once we sort of decompress that Ahamkar, we start to ask them, hey, where did you get the idea that you're a failure to begin with? Once we kind of sit with them and work with them, and as that identity goes down, like what we'll observe, and this is, I'm sure y'all have seen this, where like you're working with a client and they seem like super stuck and you're sitting there week after week, like helping them understand themselves. And then like the next week they just go and like do what they were supposed to do. Y'all had that experience before? Yeah, so everyone's nodding because people can't see that. Who here wants to share an experience, not really violating privacy or anything like that, but who here wants to share an experience about that with a client? Like, can anyone say something? Like, where you thought you were doing a terrible job, it didn't seem like y'all were getting anywhere, and then all of a sudden... Anyone feel like sharing?
Yeah,
I'll share one. Oh, go ahead, David.
Yeah, I had a client, and I'm going to talk slow just to make sure that I'm not sort of violating anything. But I had a client for about 16 weeks, and we sort of just kept exploring and understanding, and sort of they kept talking about their goals and didn't really feel like they were getting anywhere. And then, I felt like I wasn't doing anything. They never sort of reported back any like progress or anything. And then I think it was before 16 weeks, probably like 12 or 13. They just sort of had this story of, they went out and did everything that they had wanted to do. And up until that point, I'm like, I'm doing nothing. I don't know what I'm doing. I like brought the case to like supervision a bunch. And then, like they just turned around and like, oh yeah, this has been super helpful. Like I have a great understanding of everything. Thanks. And it was good after that.
Great. Yeah. So I think that's where it's interesting. But even in psychiatry, we have a saying that all boats rise together. And so I think a big part of what we do in coaching is helping people and people do this in therapy as well. I mean, it's like a general observation of humans that a lot of times, there's some fundamental things that that keep us from like moving forward in multiple dimensions of our lives. And so I think part of the key thing, did somebody else want to share before we move on?
I have a success case if I
Sure, go for it.
I had a client who we spent like maybe like 4 or 5 weeks really trying to get him like outside of his house. He like spent a whole bunch of time indoors and like could never really get there. And then he really wanted to go for a walk down the street to get some breakfast. And one day he did, we had our session, he had his week. He then later told me that on the first day he went out and did it, realized it actually wasn't too bad, and like went like another 3 or 4 times and went to the gym twice that week. And like all of a sudden just crushed all his goals. And it was really, now he's a crusher.
Yeah. So I know it sounds kind of weird, but what we're going to explain to y'all over the next 4 days is why that happens. Okay. We're going to start to talk a little bit about so we've figured this out. So on the back end at HG, what we've done is done all these calculations. It goes into the way that y'all, like the curriculum that we put y'all through. And so y'all are already doing it. And now we're going to kind of bump y'all up to the next level by teaching y'all how that happens and why that happens. So the first thing that I want to share about motivation is that it's an emergent property. And so what I mean by that is if we listen to what y'all are saying, okay, there's like emotions involved, there's like likelihood of success involved. There are all these different variables that go into motivation. And the challenge with issues of motivation is that when a client feels like they're not motivated, what they see is an emergent property, right? So what we're going to see from Eli's case, for example, is someone who's doing all their things. From David's case, it's someone who's crushing it on all levels. And then the question kind of becomes how do I duplicate that? So when we look so motivation is a term, and this is why I don't think there's a Sanskrit word for motivation. It's a term that is designed from external observation. So if you look within yourself, you won't find motivation. You'll find emotions, you'll find desires, you'll find things that you care about. But motivation is something, when I look at someone who's crushing it on the outside and I look at them and I make a judgment from the outside, I call them motivation. So motivation is almost like this emergent property that people see from the outside. And if you go and you talk to someone who goes to the gym every day, I know it sounds kind of weird, but they won't say that they're highly motivated. It's not like they get up every day and are filled with passion and are I'm going to go to the gym. It's just they're no, it's just kind of what I do now. It makes me feel better. But there's sort of this idea of motivation, which is built from people standing on the outside and watching someone else. and saying, oh, wow, that person must be like intrinsically driven in some deep and profound way that I don't feel. And the reason that they make that conclusion is because on the inside, what they feel is something deep and profound that keeps them stuck. So as we kind of understand motivation, what we're going to try to do is unpack, like, what are all of the things that go into it? And as we unpack all of the different variables of motivation, my hope is that y'all as coaches will be able to help their clients figure out, like, what's the problem here? And this is also why we have a gigantic motivation, like, industry. We have tons of information about motivation, and we have the least motivated generation, like, in the history of humanity. I don't know if that's actually factually true or not. It's how it feels. And so it's kind of interesting because how can we account for sort of like this discrepancy between all the information that's out there and how unmotivated people are? And we'll kind of get to that. I think the issue is that, you know, when I look at a life hack or I look at like a success YouTuber, they're not going to be able to like tailor what they say to me, right? There's no process of like interaction where we can figure out, okay, which advice is actually the advice that I should follow. So we have people like consuming all this advice and like not making changes in their life. So the real advantage, and this is where I think this is your duty as a coach, is to understand all these different dimensions and help a client figure out, okay, what are we dealing with here? Is this an issue of a hamkad? Is this an issue of manas? Is this an issue where like you feel too much emotion or negative shame? Is this an issue where there are people around you who are like, you know, preventing you from being your best self? Like, do you have like, you know, are your gamer buddies like messaging you, you know, at 5 p.m. every day and want you to get on and like play games with them? Like, how does that impact your motivation the next day? So as a coach, really the key thing here is that as we teach you this model, like you need to take this model and apply it to your clients so that you can guide them in a more specific manner. There's also other advantages to that, which we'll kind of get to. Questions about that? Okay. So kind of the analogy that I'd use about motivation, just to kind of wrap up, is remember I kind of called it an emergent property. And so the thing about emergent properties is that any individual component does not appear to be like responsible for what we see. And just like, you know, you can look at just like you can look at like a bird, right? And you can look at the property of flight. It's not the muscle that creates flight. It's not the bone that creates flight. It's not the wing that creates flight. And what happens is we have clients that look around and they see other birds flying and they themselves don't see themselves flying. And so then what happens is they just end up basically like, you know, they end up trying to figure out, why can't I fly? And it's your job as a coach to basically help them figure out, okay, what's the part of your wing that's busted? Okay. Okay. So next thing that we're going to do is, so any questions about that? Okay. So now we're going to get started with goal setting and motivation. Let me just go ahead and screen share this with y'all. And then let's see here. Give me 1 second. So got a screen share and change. Okay. And then, let's go here. Okay. So our model for goal setting and motivation is built on a couple of core concepts, okay? The first is that not all people are the same. So your job as a coach is to help people find a customizable solution to their individual, or to their problems, okay? The second thing is that good diagnosis precedes good treatment. And if we look at the efficacy of a coach, you know, y'all aren't diagnosing or treating anything, but your efficacy as a coach and why we help clients is because like they're actually not good diagnosticians. They will look at themselves and they won't actually accurately diagnose where their motivational problems are. And then the third thing is going to be a little bit contradictory, but while personalized approaches are important, like a big part of what we do at Healthy Gamer is that we can rely on disciplines to give us frameworks. So what we're going to do is we're going to teach y'all some things from neuroscience, psychology, spirituality, and things like that. And the key thing here is that if we kind of think about, okay, couldn't anyone do this? And the answer is yes, anyone can do this. But what we're going to do is by giving you guys these key takeaways from different disciplines, you'll be able to help a client faster and to a greater degree than they would be able to do on their own, because we're going to kind of give you all the information. Sure, and anyone out there could go and read about neuroscience, about psychology, about behavioral economics, about spirituality. And if they do enough of that self-study, that they'll be able to figure out, what works for them eventually. What we try to do as coaches, though, is we have all of the not all, but we give you guys the most relevant information, and it's your job as a coach to apply that information when necessary with your client. Any questions about that? Okay, so now we're going to have kind of an interesting question. So here's the basic premise under which we're going to understand motivation. So who knows what this equation is? Anyone know? Look familiar?
Is that voltage equals current over resistance?
Very good. Steven, bonus points because my handwriting is so bad. So who here understands, does anyone know what voltage means? What is voltage?
It's like a measure of electricity, right? Like how strong it is?
It is involved in electricity. So this is Ohm's law for people who are curious. Okay. So let's move on to another variable. What is the I? Current, okay? So we've got Twitch chat helping us out. So Ohm's law says basically that voltage, like Steven said, equals current over resistance, okay? So if we think about current is what we put into the circuit. It's the energy input, okay? Resistance is, what's resistance?
You're controlling the amount of current that gets through.
Yeah, so it's kind of it's the resistance, right? So it's what takes away. How can I say this? It's what takes away whatever you're trying to do. So the other way we can think about current law, takes away is a terrible definition. Hold on, let me think about what's a better definition for this. It's the force that our current has to act against. Let's call it that. It's the force opposing what we're trying to do. Okay? And then the voltage is sort of the potential difference. And the potential difference is where you start and where you end up. So I'll give you all kind of another analogy. Let's say I have a pipe that is flowing from the second floor to the first floor, right? So the potential difference, this is a measure of voltage, is the gravitational potential from here to here is what causes water to move this way. Are we good on that? Does that make sense? Right? Because that's a gravitational potential energy. So when you look at something like a battery, that voltage across the battery, this may not be an accurate term, but if you look at why electrons move from one point, the cathode to from the anode to the cathode, there's an electrical potential there, a voltage, that causes things to move in a particular direction. So this is where we start, and this is where we end. Okay? And so I'm going to ask you all, so if we think about, how can I get more water over here? What are the different things that I can do to increase the water flow that's on this side?
Put more water in the pipe.
Yep. So you can add more water, right? So that's current. We can pump more water in. What else can we do?
And reduce the resistance.
Yep. So we can widen the pipe, right? So resistance in terms of flow mechanics is the width of the pipe. So anyone who's had bubble tea with a bubble tea straw versus a tiny little straw, you get more liquid if the straw is wider, right? We can reduce the resistance. What else can we do? We can put our pipe like this. Does that make sense? So we can activate that gravitational energy like even better, right? We can increase the strength of the cathode or the anode. So I know it sounds kind of weird, but I think this is a fantastic equation to even understand psychological resistance. So there's the goal, right? And like where you want to go. There's the energy we put in, or the intent, and then there's the resistance. Right? So these are things like shame, emotions. Okay? Aham God is here too. Yeah.
It's V equals IR. Multiplication, not division.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, so that tanks particular things, but let's stick with this for now.
We can talk about the current instead.
Yeah, so I think it's still fine. So
Just turn resistance into a negative.
Yeah, let me think about that.
Bunch of nerds.
Let me think about that. Okay, I'll get back to y'all on that. So let's kind of keep going for now, just because we're in this already. So this is where, so as we kind of think about this in terms of like coaching, what we want to do is actually think about it this way. So when we think about a behavior, there's the intent that people put in, okay? Then there's the resistance that they have to overcome. And then there's the action that they take towards the end. All right, so these are the three dimensions that we're going to be exploring. And in my experience, the problem that most people have with goal setting and motivation is that like they don't understand that all three of these things can be acted on, okay? So what a lot of people will sometimes do, let's just talk about willpower for a second. So I think about willpower is like a limited mana pool that you can use to kind of like power through this equation. So I can just expend a certain amount of willpower to like overcome this resistance hump and take an action one time. And then, you know, I can do that again. And each time that I like sort of drain my willpower battery, oh, damn it. What'll happen is like I can take actions, but it's not sustainable. So we see this pattern a lot with students who are not happy with the kind of, how can I say this? We see this a lot with students who are not like happy with being students. So they'll start the semester off with like a fully charged battery and they'll use willpower to like study for the first month. They'll like dig real deep and study for the second month. And then like by the end of it, they're like burnt out and they don't really like enjoy what they're doing. They never enjoyed what they were doing. It was a slog from day one. It's just they were relying on willpower to get there. So as coaches, what we're going to kind of focus on is understanding intent, resistance, and action. Okay? These are the three major components. So what do I mean by intent? So a lot of times people will say like I know it sounds kind of weird, but when your clients have a goal, like where does that goal come from? What do y'all think?
Usually like desires like that are external or like, you know, what's the word? Indriyas, right?
Okay, desires from the indriyas. Good. Indriyas are sense organs. What else? Where else does when someone says, I have a goal, I want to do something, where is that intent coming from? Why do they want to do it? Sometimes it's a desire. What else could it be?
Could be pressure from like culture or family.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to call this should. Right? So like this is something I want to do. That's a desire. This is something I should do. What else? What else can drive someone to action? Do people do things that they don't want to do and that they should? Do people do things that they don't want to do and that they shouldn't do?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Right? So this is where, as we look at other things, I'm going to kind of call, so yeah, okay, pressure was fine. So I'd say that we also do things because we're driven by our values. So like what drives what we want to do? Our values and our duty. So these are kind of the four things that I kind of think of when I think about what goes into intent. The other key thing about, so when we think about these four things, the goal of this as a coach is like, a lot of times people don't realize that the goals they set for themselves aren't truly their goals. And so the ability to get energy up and engage in those goals when this is something that I should do versus something that I actually like care about. So we see this a lot like with, you know, second generation Indians, is that like everyone wants to be a doctor. And very few of us actually want to be doctors. Most of us like should be doctors. And there's like societal pressure to do a particular thing. We also see this a lot with our clients who, for example, like we don't, you know, not all of our clients are degens, right? So some of our clients are actually like, you know, they have jobs and things like that. A lot of our clients do. So sometimes we see this with clients who, for example, like they have a job that is very successful, like they're successful, but they feel unfulfilled. And how do I manage that, right? Because I should stay in my job because this is a good job to have. Oh, why isn't this working? What? Is my pen busted? Weird. Okay, hold on. Let me just go to this in a second. So they may have like a particular thing that they feel like they should do, or it's dumb to not do this thing. There we go. But what they really care about is something else. What they value is something else. So like I may be a successful programmer at Google, but what I care about is like running D&D campaigns and telling stories. And so oftentimes what keeps clients stuck is that their intent is not clarified. So there's a conflict of intent. And this is why they stay stuck. And so the key thing that we want to do here as coaches is help them clarify, like, okay, what is a desire? What's something that you want? What's something that you should do? What do you care about? And what are you duty bound to do? What's your obligation? And it's interesting, but just even having this conversation and helping people realize that, oh, this is something that you should do, but it's not something that you want to do. Do y'all think once someone understands that, are they more likely or less likely to engage in the behavior?
More likely.
Why do you say that, Eli?
Because they're not trying to fight their emotions anymore. They can validate how they feel about it, and it kind of naturally like reduces the intensity of that.
Perfect. So this is I know it's kind of weird, but like I'm going to give y'all like a scenario, okay? I'm curious. I'm sure y'all have heard this from your clients, but okay, I need to do X. I can't do X. Therefore, I'm an idiot. So we see this a lot in people with ADHD. I should be able to do X. And then let me ask you something. What do you think this statement does to their ability to like engage in action, and how does that affect their motivation?
It strengthens the ahamkar and makes it harder to act because now your identity is like, you know, I suck at doing stuff. So how can I ever do it?
Exactly. So this is the key thing. So another key thing that we're going to do in terms of intent, we can clarify these intents, but remember that when people are stuck, oftentimes they're ambivalent, right? Can someone explain what ambivalence means?
It's when you
like on
feel
the
two
fence.
ways about one thing.
On the fence. What did you say, Steven?
Just that you were feeling two ways about one thing.
Yeah, feeling two ways, right? So this is the other thing. So when human beings don't engage in a behavior, right, they're conflicted. There's like a pro side and a con side. And one of the biggest challenges that our clients recognize is that they never see the con side. They're blind to it. So I'll give you all an example. Like they say, oh, I should study instead of playing games all day. So they don't see like, it's one-dimensional for them. This is going to sound kind of abstract, but all they see is what they should do. Like they have their eyes set on the goal, and that's all they're focused on. What they don't see is what they gain by playing games all day. They don't see the other side of the equation. And so this is what creates this mentality over here. This is a thought process that's created from blindness. It's a thought process that people don't realize that they can't do X for a very good reason. There's something within them that is keeping them from doing X. right? And it's not just that they're undisciplined, it's that they may have some kind of fear, or they have this this identity which is telling them, and we'll get to this in a second, like an identity that's telling them, oh, you're going to fail, so don't bother. And that's the reason that they can't do it, is because there's literally a part of their brain that is calculating the likelihood of success. So there's a part of our brain that continually makes a calculation that is like, what are the pros, what are the cons, what's the risk, what's the benefit, or what's the benefit, what's the cost, and what's the likelihood of success. It's sort of like benefit minus cost times likelihood of success is a calculation that our mind is always doing anytime we're like doing anything. And then that sort of results in behavior or not behavior. And so what people don't recognize is that there's like actually a benefit to being unmotivated. So a big part of what we do here in terms of how we deal with intent, we're going to spend a whole day on this, is we're going to talk about clarifying desires, shoulds, values, and duties. And when we do this with clients, like they'll be, it's like magic. They'll just be like more prone to engage in the right behavior. And it's hard to describe, but when you give human beings an open-ended or like sort of an honest assessment of what something will cost them, they're more likely to pay that cost for the benefit. So by clarifying for people like, oh, if you stop playing video games and you start going to class, you're going to be behind. You're going to feel behind. No matter how hard you study, you won't be able to get an A. And if you kind of think about it, like that's devastating for your motivation. And by helping clients understand that no matter how hard you work now, the highest grade you can get is a B. You can get 100% on every single test from here on out, and the best you can get is a B. That crushes people subconsciously. It keeps them from ever engaging in the behavior. But when you make that cost transparent to them, once they really understand and digest that cost, they are much more likely to engage in the behavior. And so this kind of hidden cost that they don't realize is also where their ambivalence comes from, because there's a subconscious part of their mind that doesn't want to pay that cost. And we know from evidence-based motivational interviewing that clarifying ambivalence leads people in the right direction, right? So there have been lots of studies. We teach y'all some motivational interviewing techniques, how you play with that ambivalence. And this is the really interesting thing. I had a really cool case from someone presented a case in case review where someone had a client who was doing something incredibly idiotic, like just making terrible decision after terrible decision after terrible decision as it related to a particular relationship. And so the coach like was tearing their hair out, and they were like, this is a terrible idea. You just need to go no contact with this person and cut this person out of your life. And every time that their client tells this story to their friends say the same thing. You need to go no contact with this person. Go no contact with this person. This person is toxic. And then the coach was like, I have no idea how to get my client to see that this is a terrible relationship that you're engaging in and you should go no contact with them. But interestingly enough, they resisted that impulse. They didn't play into the drama that the client was recruiting them in, because what do you think happens? So if your client tells you something that you think is idiotic and you tell them it's idiotic, how is that going to affect their behavior? Are they going to keep doing it, or are they going to listen to you and stop doing it?
They're probably going to double down.
Absolutely, right? And that's the key thing. I know it sounds bizarre. That's the key learning from motivational interviewing. So when you try to push someone in a particular direction in terms of behavior, there's a decent chance that if you're kind of pushing this way, and they're ambivalent about it. Oh, you need to stop fucking smoking. Like, it's terrible for you. You're going to die. And like, everyone hates it. You're so bad at smoking. Oh my God. Like, stop the smoking. Oh my God. What they're going to do is they're going to double down and push back twice as hard. So this is where reflective listening and sort of playing with that ambivalence and even holding the side of, oh, it sounds like, this person must mean a lot to you because it's clear that they're like really screwing with your life. So the relationship must be really important to you in some way. When you say something like that, like, what is the client going to say? You guys seen this play out before in coaching?
Yeah, usually like some amount of confusion and just like thinking about it like, oh shit, like, huh, that kind of thing.
Exactly, right? So when you kind of say, oh, like, it sounds like this relationship is really important to you because they're super toxic and everyone's telling you to go no contact with them, they must be like super amazing. And then they're like kind of confused because that's not usually what they hear. And then they start thinking about it. And when they start thinking about it, that's when the change begins to happen. Right? It's really interesting. So this is the intent. So what we're going to do is we're going to work with ambivalence, which you guys should be pretty familiar with. We're going to teach you guys how to clarify your client's intent. And for some people, like, this is the problem. Like, their intent is confused. The next thing in terms of resistance. So when someone has a clear intent and they try to engage in a problem, so it's V equals IR, right? Oops. So there's resistance over here. And so, the greater the resistance, the less likely they are to engage in the behavior, right? So the two main contributions of resistance are manas, or emotions, and ahamkar, or ego. Okay, what do y'all think about that?
I mean, that's straight facts.
Yeah, there's not a lot to say. So we'll go into more detail, so we have a whole day about this. So the other interesting thing is that resistance manifests as stuck behaviors. Okay? So what this means is, like, when people are like watching YouTube all day, when they're doing drugs, when they're gaming all day, when they're procrastinating, like, all these things are like manifestations of resistance. So if you kind of think about, like, why do our clients like watch YouTube all day? Like, what does that do for them?
Keeps them in the present.
Absolutely, right? What's another way to put it? Steven here is a mindfulness Chad.
It just kind of looks like the YouTube and drugs and all that stuff shuts off a lot of the manas and active ahamkar and things like that.
Absolutely, right? So the other way to look at it is that we can look at neuroscience articles on internet addiction. And if we do an fMRI study, which is a study of blood flow to the brain, what we discover from these like various, articles on internet addiction is that fMRI studies demonstrate that these activities shut down negative emotions circuits. So what they're essentially doing is actually self-medicating against this crap over here. And oftentimes, I'm sure y'all understand this as well, like, what does arguing with strangers on the internet do to your ahamkar?
It's like really fun.
Fantastic.
So it really feeds into it.
Boosts the ahamkar. And remember that the ahamkar becomes active when? What activates the ahamkar? What does it do?
It's like a threat that's perceived.
You.
So if I feel like a failure and I go argue and school some noob on the internet, how do I feel?
You feel good that you're like
Like a winner.
pumping yourself up.
Yeah, right? I'm owning these noobs. Who cares that I'm 28 years old and living in my mom's basement? I'm owning noobs on the internet. I'm owning the libs. I'm owning the conservatives. I'm a strong social justice warrior, and I do lots of virtue signaling. Or I'm owning the libs. Like, it goes either way. Like, whatever it is, it's all a ahamkar. And so what people will do is, like, the worse they feel about themselves, the more they'll engage with these kinds of things. And this is what's great. Like, so this is where it gets really devastating. But, there are platforms like Twitter and YouTube and stuff that, like, recognize that engaging people involves, like, activating their ahamkar. So people get pissed off on Twitter so much. Like, why is that? It's because no one can make, like, a fair or nuanced argument. It's all just emotionally charged crap that people are reacting to, right? There's no way to have a discussion over Twitter. You can have an argument over Twitter, I don't know if y'all saw the Jimmy from Philly interview, but like Jimmy from Philly interview is impossible to have over Twitter. You have to like actually have a conversation. You can argue with Jimmy from Philly. You could tell him he's dumb and he can tell you that you're dumb. That works great. So it's kind of interesting, but all of these things that we see in this generation, like, we need to understand these principles. And as a coach, it's your job to help them overcome their resistance and kind of work through some of these behaviors and get them in the direction that they want to go. I would say that resistance is probably the biggest blind spot for our clients. And this is why oftentimes we'll do things that clients will be kind of confused about. And they'll say, like, is this something I should be talking to my therapist about? Because you're kind of focusing on negative emotions. And you can absolutely talk to the therapist about it. And this is where it comes back to what the goals are. Because what everyone in our community knows is they know what they need to do. They just don't understand why they can't do it. And why they can't do it. So, like, I know I have a clear intent. I need to do this thing. So it's this part over here that they're blind to. And so that's what we have to help them overcome. So the way that we practically are going to do that is, we're going to use like reflective listening and be compassionate and authentic and all that good stuff. We're going to call them out on their BS, right? When we sort of sniff it out sometimes, but we're going to do it for the purpose of growth. And as we kind of explore this stuff with them, as we sort of decompress them on us, as they no longer feel ashamed, no longer feel afraid, their ego no longer needs to activate. And once their ego gets out of the way, what's left? What's running the show afterward? Anyone remember? What's the third part of the mind that we want to be operating from?
Intellect.
Yep, buddhi. And this is the big problem. If you guys, have watched Dr. K's guide, hopefully people will understand this concept. But the big problem is that everyone thinks that they're operating on intellect all the time, but oftentimes it's a ahamkar controlling the intellect. And so what happens is they have a lot of biases, right? They think that they're behaving perfectly logically, and the person they're arguing with thinks that they're behaving perfectly logically as well. Everyone's perfectly logical because my mind is logical, right? I'm not irrational. Everyone else is irrational. But as long as the ahamkar is controlling the buddhi, the conclusions of the buddhi are going to be incorrect. So this is the problem, is that they all think they're operating well, and this is why it's tricky as a coach, but helping them recognize their blind spots in terms of emotion is how you're going to overcome the resistance. We'll give you all more techniques and more details on that later. And this is also what's kind of frustrating for a lot of our clients, is when they have resistance, it's kind of like a blocked pipe. And so then what they do is they're pumping more stuff into this end, right? And like this is what leads to burnout and frustration. Because they're kind of focusing on like building up motivation and dumping energy into the system. And they dump more energy and they dump more energy and more energy. Whereas all it really takes is an elegant solution of reducing this resistance, clearing that blockage, and then suddenly the amount of energy they need to put in the system is actually less, and they get more output. And this is where, if we go back to the cases that we heard earlier, people were like, they weren't doing anything, and suddenly they're crushing all their goals. Like, how the fuck does that work? It's because y'all are removing that resistance in the middle. And then suddenly it starts flowing, and it feels natural. And this is the thing, is when people think about motivation, they think like, oh my God, it's like, I have to like work really hard. No, true motivation is like, feels very natural. It actually feels effortless. And that's what we want to shoot for with our clients. Okay? Another thing that I should mention, so oftentimes this resistance is also a samskar. I guess that goes without saying with y'all, but just for the sake of completeness. And then we get to the third dimension, which is action. So this is probably the area at Healthy Gamer that we've been the least supportive of y'all with. We really could have done a better job, and that's actually the main thing around this, this training is a big part of that. So at the end of the day, setting the right kind of goals is like really, really important for our clients. So we've got a couple of steps here. First is understand the person. So I'm going to ask y'all a couple of questions. How do your clients decide what goal to pick? Where do their goals come from?
When they want to
they should
change
do.
something. Oh,
Okay, should do. Go ahead, Kent.
when they want to change something about themselves.
But how do they know that that's something that they should change, or in what way they're going to change it?
They look around a lot and see other people doing stuff or being things.
All right. So, what games? Y'all play games? What do y'all play?
League.
Okay. League noob. Okay. So, like, this is kind of interesting, but like, so what, if I let's say I watch a video on League and I see some pro player like owning with this hero or champion, right? And then I'm like, oh, like if I want to own games and climb and gain MMR, like I need to play that hero. How effective is that is a strategy to like win at League?
Terrible.
Why?
Because
But
your
they're-
character choice
they-
isn't why you're winning or losing.
But no, Pax, dude, I saw this guy. He was crushing with his hero.
Yeah, well, maybe if you were more of a Sigma male, you would have like won with that character.
Okay. Right? So it's interesting. So like this happens all the time in Dota 2, where like, you know, you'll look at what other people are owning with and you're like, oh, like this happens all the time. So I don't know if you guys have had this experience where you get owned by a particular hero in a game. And it's like next, like that's so easy. It's so broken. Oh my God, it's so OP. And the next game, when you queue up, you're like, I'm gonna pick that OP hero. It's gonna be an easy win. It's so broken. What happens?
You get crushed.
Absolutely, right? So I want y'all to think about this because this is legit, okay? That's literally how our community picks their goals. They look at some random ass person and they say, look at what that person did to be successful. Let me just mimic what they did and then I will be successful. And then they get crushed. Because, Steven's spot on, they look around for their goals. Okay? One of my first coaching clients ever got out of jail. And I was like, he's like, I need to find a job. And I was like, what kind of job do you want? And he's like, well, I have a buddy who works at a car wash. So I guess I'll work there. And it's like, hold on a second, bro. Take a big step back. You know, you've got 2 weeks of like stuff where you have to find a job before you start working at the car wash. Let's think about like what all of your options are. So after talking to him for a long time and like working through stuff, he started to get a job at a car wash, but he also like started getting into EMT training, became an EMT, started working as an EMT for a while, then like went into the med tech field and then is now like a medical device rep or something like that. But most of where our clients' goals come from is just like what they see other people doing. Oh, it worked for this person. It worked for, you know, reading one book a day is how this person made $1 million. So I'm going to start reading one book a day. So the first thing that we want to do in terms of setting the right goals is understand the person. And a lot of times, like, they don't do this step, right? They look outside of themselves to try to figure out what the right goal is. And this can be very frustrating for our clients because they'll come in the first week and they'll be like, how do I fix my life? Give me the plan. But we can't give them the plan yet. We have to understand who they are first. Then we can worry about the plan, okay? So, understand the person. And then the second thing is set appropriate goals. And there are a couple of techniques here that we're going to teach y'all. Right? So it's not going to be you set the goal for them. It's the two y'all are going to like work together to set the right goal. And then, you're going to develop an action plan. They're going to try it. And when they try it, what's going to happen? They're going to do it.
They're going to fail.
They're going to fail. Excellent. Then what's your job as a coach?
Provide compassion through their trial and error.
Excellent. Because here's the big thing, right? So when I set a goal for myself and I fail, like that creates all the crap, manas, ahamkar, all that sort of stuff. So as a coach, we're going to help them pick themselves up off the ground, dust themselves off, and try again, right? So we're going to provide emotional support, and we're also going to provide feedback. So we're going to be a lens, because in that mindset, like, it's hard to be objective, right? So we're going to be objective for them, and we're going to try to figure things out. And then essentially our goal setting and like accountability, approach as coaches is iterative. Who knows what this word means?
It means you have to iterate, which means each time something goes wrong, you change one thing and you keep doing that until you find something that works.
Yep. Perfect. Right. So we want to set appropriate. So as a goal, we want to set, as coaches, we want to set appropriate goals. These goals should factor in strengths and weaknesses of the client. Right? Next thing that we need to do, support them when they screw up. And then fourth thing is iterate. How can we do it better next time? And so in my experience, when y'all do this, okay, when you clarify intent, when you work with their resistance, when you set appropriate goals, This is how you help someone change their life. Questions?
Yeah, I had one question about the you said your first client, he got out of jail and then, he was like, okay, I should start working at the car wash because my friend is there. The way you told the story, it sounds like, you kind of immediately kind of like he said that and then you were like, well, hang on, like let's think about this. I don't know if that's how it actually panned out or if that was just like the summary version, because my understanding is like sometimes like it kind of depends on where you're at with like the relationship. Sometimes like putting the brakes on something, like that kind of assumption is like, you kind of have to like let it ride for a little bit first before you can like actually explore alternatives. But it sounds like the way you told it was like you went straight to there.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what I did. I think y'all would handle this. Y'all would have done the same, basically. So I basically asked him, help me understand, or let me ask you. So if your client, let's see if y'all, I'll just say it. So I asked him, like, help me understand, like, how you came to the conclusion to work at the car wash.
Right.
And then I asked, like, simple open-ended questions that made him realize that he had, like, huge errors in his thought process and catalyzed change, which is, what else did you consider? And he was like, I didn't consider anything else. That's not what he said. He was like, I don't know. Right? So, like, people don't... So this is the big problem. This is why y'all are useful, to be blunt. Is because people don't... They're blind to their own blind spots. Right? That's the biggest problem. So if we think about, like, why people stay stuck, like, human beings are smart, especially our community. Like, if they understand a problem correctly, they will fix it themselves. So by definition, the problems that people get stuck on are the ones that are misdiagnosed. This is a concept that started with Carl Jung. And he kind of said, like, everyone has a shadow, and the most growth that a human being can have is in looking at the shadow, because the shadow is the part of yourself that by definition you neglect to look at. And so, like, most of the things, like, if there's one part of the world that's, like, forbidden, that's where there's the most opportunity for discovery. Does that make sense, Pax?
Oh, for sure.
Right? So like, in terms of how I work with this person, so I asked him, like, what else did you consider? And he's like, what? That's not how he operates, right? He doesn't think about approaching his life in a systematic way. He just kind of, like, does what he sees other people doing, which is how most of us do it. It's how our brain, let's monkey see, monkey do, right? That's how, like, you think about how you learn slang. Like, how does that happen? There's no intent. There are, like, circuits in your brain that are literally designed to adjust your behavior based on what you see and shape your behavior. I don't know if y'all have ever, like, lived in a different country where there was, like, a social custom that, like, people there didn't do. So for me, it's like shaking hands. It's like I went to India and I'd, like, shake people's hands and they were, like, confused because they don't do that there. And after a while, I kind of stopped. Right? So I just, like, and so there's, like, literally a part of my brain that's, like, constantly adjusting how I view situations. And then over time, I started asking questions like, what do you care about? Like, are you passionate about car washes? Like, do you want to be an entrepreneur? Do you want to open up your own car wash one day? And he's like, no. And he's like, what he cared about was excitement. So his options were, like, join the military or, like, do something else that's exciting. So I would ask him, like, what do you find exciting? He's like, I think combat would be cool. I was like, okay, what else? And he's like, well, like, maybe, like, being a police officer. And, like, we kind of stumbled on EMT. And I was like, okay, like, maybe if you want to, go into combat, maybe EMT training would be helpful. And he hated school. Like, he hated EMT training. But he was totally fine doing it, gave it 100% because, like, oh, like, this is going to be useful for me, even though I detest doing it. Going to school for the purpose of, like, it's good for me is not a good motivator. Even doing school that you detest doing because he wants to live an exciting life, he doesn't want to sit in a classroom somewhere, and telling him, hey, if you, like, wind up in combat somewhere, maybe it'll be useful to get EMT skills. And he's like, yeah, I can get behind that. And then he's motivated. Right? And then you do, like, further work with him. You ask him, why are you craving excitement? Things like that. You kind of get deeper and deeper. And then eventually he ends up with one of the most boring jobs in the universe. Or maybe it's exciting. I don't know. But he's a medical device rep. He likes his job. He's happy. Has the added benefit of, lower chance of casualty. Other questions?
Yeah, I'm curious where like focus or attention comes into play to like motivation or like the intent, resistance, action.
The focusing of attention.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
focus, attention, stuff like that.
So we'll get into that. So there's stuff there's a lot of stuff that has to do with motivation, which is a little bit outside the scope of coaching. But when we think about that intent, so focus is there, is what I would put on the intent side. So if we think about check out, I don't know if y'all have y'all watched the video on Dharana, or the origin of motivation in Dr. K's guide? Y'all gone through that?
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of stuff there, but basically if we think about how do you sustain motivation, I recognize that we just sort of said motivation isn't one thing, but I'd say that focusing your attention is like the major way of doing it. And where does attention fit into that graph? It fits into the intention side. It's the energy that you put in. So the more focused your mind is, the more like cognitive energy you can leverage into a particular thing.
Wouldn't it also come into play into action to keep yourself like focused on what you're doing?
Yes, you could definitely put it there. That has probably more to do with the way that I'm defining action, which is like around appropriate goal setting and adjusting expectations and things like that. So it's absolutely a part of like physically what they have to do. Yes, absolutely. But in terms of, and so this is what's a little bit different about talking about motivation in general and talking about it as a coach. So what we're doing here is trying to help you figure out how can you like essentially like increase, the gravity of their situation so that the potential difference between where they want to go and where they are and where they want to go is like easy for them. That's your goal as a coach, right? So an example of that is, y'all know the half of half rule in terms of goal setting. You guys have picked this up yet? So in terms of goal setting, what we recommend is think about where you are, think about where you want to go, cut that in half, and then cut that in half again. That should be your first target. So that's something that the parent program was very successful because of like that principle. Because all these parents like have this idea that they want to transform their kids into like, 4.0 valedictorians who are playing sports and, learning a musical instrument. It just like ain't gonna happen. You got to like adjust your expectations and start small. And then like over time, like it's interesting because we can get 100% of the way there. Like it's absolutely possible. We just want to start in a particular way as a coach. You want to help your client set a goal for themselves that they can achieve and then like build on that success. And then the challenge, we'll get to this in the goal setting, but the challenge with that is that they're going to say like, what is a client going to say if they say, oh, I need to like, get a 4.0, and you tell them like, why don't you start with a 2.0? What's their resistance going to be?
That's not good enough.
Exactly. Right. So that's where you do the work as a coach of helping them let go of that idea. Like not good enough is not a reason to keep from acting. You got to start somewhere. Like if you end up with a 4.0, great. But if you never crack the book because you're saying to yourself, whatever I do today is not going to be good enough, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is why they believe it in the first place. Because what they've tried in the past has not been enough. So you got to get underneath that and like help them dismantle the idea of like not good enough. It's not a thing. There's only action. And I see lots of nodding too. So I know y'all are familiar with that and good at that. Other questions? All right. Every time I say the word nodding, chat just emotes with some head bobbing Pepe thing. Okay. So I'm going to ask chat questions. Are y'all okay sticking around for a few minutes? And we'll see if... Okay, so chat, do y'all have any questions? We'll see if any of these coaches want to answer them. Okay, how to identify... So here's the two questions I've got for y'all. One person's asking how to get a job. What would y'all say to that?
I would probably ask a question first in the way of like,
Good.
what makes you want a job?
Perfect. Right? Like, that's the right answer. Like, because until we understand, like, who you are, what motivates you, like, that question is a prime example of why it's important that you do your job well. Because it's an external, like, you'll see, like, everything that we talked about is in that question. It's like, oh, other people have jobs, let me get one. Jobs are OP, like, let me go get one. Let's just go get it. Easy. Done. Help me find a job. Help me do this external target thing that I've decided is right for me. There's no sense of like what you're good at, what you care about, what holds you back. Why haven't you been able to find a job to begin with? Why do you want a job? What kind of job do you want? What does job mean to you? Let's understand all that crap, because right now we're trying to play a game where we're like completely blind to what our character's stats actually are. Okay, next question. Great question. How to identify and reduce resistance. What do y'all think?
I think that's really hard to do on your own. And it would kind of involve in like, okay, so like, what is it you're trying to do? And what happens whenever you like think about or try to do it? And like kind of start from there and kind of see what happens.
Can you say more about what happens? Like what kind of thing, or what kind of thing should someone look out for, Pax?
Yeah, so like if someone's trying to get a job, then like, I think the first step, for a lot of like practically is like, okay, so like let's like look at places. And it's like, okay, can you do that? And it's like, okay, yes, you can like look for places to apply to. And then it's like, well, what happens when you start to apply? It's like when you get the I forget what you call it, whatever it is you fill it out, you're like, do you fill it out and send it in? Do you not fill it out at all? Like what's going on there? And like at what like specific point in that path like do you stop and like give up?
Perfect. Does that make sense to folks? Because like here's the thing, the resistance is there, we're just not paying attention. So anytime you set a goal and as you embark towards that goal, you may not even embark, you may not even get started. But then the question is, why not? Right? And that's exactly what y'all should be helping people with as coaches, because it's really hard to understand why people don't do things. But you can just stop and pay attention to yourself. So my one of my teachers once gave me an interesting, I guess this is going to be our meditation exercise for the day. So I had a teacher who was addicted to potato chips. And so he was like a monk. And so he went to his teacher and he told his teacher, he's like, I'm addicted to potato chips. I just can't conquer my desire for potato chips. And I'll resist it, I'll control it. And then like in India, what they, less so now, but what they used to do is like, they'd fry potato chips like on the street, like fresh. So you'd have like chip makers that would just like have like a cart that has like, oil, and they just like dump chips like it's made to order. So they're delicious. So he's like, I'd resist for a few days at a time, but then eventually what would happen is like, I'll smell someone frying potato chips, and I'll be like, let me get some of that potato chips. Right. And they also put like different masalas and stuff on it, so they taste really good. And so his teacher told him, so like, stop trying to resist. So this is what you should do instead. Go and get a bag of potato chips, get like 3, make it so that you always have them. Keep one in your room, keep one in your bag, always have access to potato chips. And anytime you want a potato chip, just pay attention to how you like close your eyes and pay attention to like, where does that desire come from? If you resist that desire, what does it feel like? Where does the desire go if you resist it? If you eat the potato chip, what happens to the desire? And how long until the desire like comes back? Just like understand, like map out the entire process. And so he did that for a while, and then he gave up potato chips. Easy. Because he understood like, oh, like I eat this thing and like it makes me feel good. Man, it makes me feel really good. But then I kind of feel like my fingers are greasy and like, And then like a couple days later, oh, there's that desire. Man, it would be nice to have a potato chip. And then he eats it right away. And what happens then? So he just like played around with it for a while. He understood it. And somehow he overcame behavior. Okay, so there's a question. When coaching, how do you compartmentalize your client's issues and not be influenced emotionally or be triggered by them? to maintain an objective viewpoint versus subjective. I've noticed that in past sessions on your channel, some stories have made you emotional. How does a coach know how to maintain control of the session or where to scale back when they are emotionally affected by the client? What do y'all think?
That's a tough one for sure.
I think you be authentic and say, like maybe vocalize like, hey, like I'm kind of feeling like an emotional response to this. And yeah, I think just be authentic with them.
Yeah, and I think it is okay to have emotional reactions because like you get to know your clients, you start to feel for their story, but at least for when it happens to me, kind of like that, recognizing it, being authentic about it, and then if I need to kind of normally just saying that it's happening kind of helps me gain some perspective on it, not have it influence things too much, but sometimes it can be a useful compass to start with.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'd say that, what we try to train our coaches to do is to be like authentic and present. And so I think feeling something in a session with a client is fine as long as you're aware of what you're feeling and how it's affecting you. That's how ultimately I think you remain objective, right? It's like knowing that you're being influenced is how you retain your objectivity. Okay, last question maybe. How do you deal with the situation where someone fails because they actually weren't good enough? I wish y'all could see everyone's faces right now. The biggest grins.
It almost feels like a trap question.
Good. Say more, Kent.
So in that case of where they think they're not good enough, it's almost like they're kind of baiting me to sort of like, oh, the idea of them feeling like they're not good enough. But then as a coach, we can sort of sit down and kind of go from a third party perspective and like really look from the top down view to see where did they get this idea of not being good enough towards this situation.
Yeah, this is where I get driven the most crazy, because it's like, we go from like you failed, and then the conclusion we jump to after that is like, I'm not good enough to do it, and that's why I failed. It's like, wait, hang on. If we take 2 seconds to break down why you failed, it's like we'll figure out something totally different.
Yeah. So I anyone else have anything to say? I love these answers.
I was interested in clarifying. I think I get what Kent was really coming from in the way that it was a trap question. I think like a lot of what that has to do with is like it pulls us in a position to be like, hey man, you're actually good enough, and like do this thing where you reassure them, but that's not actually what you need to hear.
What do you think they need to hear? What's the way you would approach that?
More in the vein of like exploring how it is that we get to this idea of it's not good enough in the first place as a result of failing, understanding what other factors could possibly be at play.
Brian, did you want to add something?
Oh yeah, I was gonna say like with a question like that, it was more so it would create the like if they did like fail because like they were like bad or whatever, it would just create the opportunity to actually meet them where they're at. So if they're like if they fail because like they're trying to beat like a level 100 grade boss when they're like level 10, then like at some point we have to meet them where they're at and not look at it as like a failure, more of like you're not not leveled up correctly properly.
Yeah. So I think just to kind of summarize what the coaches were saying, and so that's fantastic. I think I'm beginning. So the consistency of y'all's response makes me understand, I think, why our outcomes are the way they are, because I think there is like a way to approach this. And the first is to understand that question in and of itself comes from like a flawed frame, right? Where like, oh, the reason I failed is because I'm actually not good enough. What does that even mean? Hold on a second. And so like kind of Pax sort of said that, why do you assume that failure is you actually not being good enough? And then like Brian's framework is really interesting because he's kind of saying, yeah, you can make the argument that you failed because you're not actually level 100 and you're actually level 10. But that's totally fine. Like there's nothing wrong with that, right? Then your solution is like, how do you level up to level 11 and then level 12 and level 13 and level 14? Whereas what happens in that person's mind is they say, oh, I'm not good enough. They attribute an action and a consequence to a personal like quality. I am not good enough. Well, how do you know that? Because you failed the test. That's an action with a result. It's not an identity. And so y'all can even see the ahamkar right there, right? So when I attribute a failure to an identity, that's the activity of ahamkar. And then I think what Kent and Steve were kind of talking a little bit about there was that when you get that question as a coach, you've got to be careful because like you don't want to step into the trap of like accepting that framework and saying, oh no, you are good enough. No, it's like there's no such thing as good enough. There's just what you are in the task that you do. And if you fail the task, how do you increase your chances the next time around? Great question. Great answers. Okay. Well, y'all want to do one more? Y'all have questions for me, or how y'all feeling?
It's like we have to operate from the shadow realm.
Yep. So here's a good question. What are the possible downsides of coaching?
Of like being a coach or being coached?
I don't know. See, I love how you guys, so this is fantastic because y'all clarify, right? So that like people will toss these questions out. What the fuck does that even question you mean? Talking about being a coach or being a client? What do y'all think for each one?
You'll be less comfortable for a little bit at least.
Are we talking about as a coach or a client or both?
Either, fine. Mostly clients, but yeah, I think that can apply either way. I think you're one step closer to getting out of whatever rut you're in, and like that's really an uncomfortable process a lot of the time.
Yep. Any other thoughts about what are the downsides of coaching?
I feel like it's a little bit of a stretch, but I have noticed that sometimes once people get into coaching and they really like see benefit of working with a coach, it's hard to stop coaching. Like they really want to keep that connection going, and maybe it's like an unforeseen consequences once you finish your goals and you've succeeded is now you have to kind of move on, and that can be kind of painful.
Yeah. Are y'all able to help all the clients that y'all work with? Remember, they can't see your face.
Oh,
Sadly, no.
no.
Nopers.
Yeah, I
What?
was actually just gonna jump in and harken back to like that conversation between coaching and therapy we sort of talked about earlier, where like some clients just genuinely, aren't in a position to benefit from coaching. And that can be from a place of like whatever sort of cognitive stuff that they're dealing with that makes it hard to like engage with the coaching environment, or in the way that like actually they need therapy and like coaching won't do what they want us to do for them.
Have y'all had a situation where like there wasn't someone who's, let's say, like mentally ill that you still failed to help in a significant way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
I've had. Oh, sorry.
Go for it.
I've had a couple of clients who had like kind of either like their situation, like their circumstance was debilitating, or like their actual physical health was debilitating. And they're like, how do I live a normal life under these conditions? And I'm like, I literally don't know, because I don't think your life is normal.
I had a client who had just finished school and had just gotten a job, and so it was kind of like financially tied down to keeping his job, and got a coach to kind of like walk himself through that. And we kind of came to the conclusion that it didn't make sense to stop his job now, and he kind of just had to deal with it, and that we weren't really able to make any progress on that. So it's kind of like there wasn't any way to work through that, I guess, other than just trying to decompress it.
Yeah. The same with Eli, sort of like maybe people going through grief or divorce or whatnot, and it's like a fresh wound, and for like 16 weeks you're like sitting with that client and hopefully helping them unload all that emotions.
So we'll toss y'all one last question. All great answers, by the way. I'm curious, have y'all ever had someone who doesn't want to be helped, who comes into coaching?
Somewhat.
Yes, I think I having my first client like last week. I got that sentiment.
Okay. So how do I get motivated about something if everything overwhelms me?
What do you mean by everything overwhelms you?
There you go. Right. So this is a prime example. So I love this question as well, because it's like illustrates like, so everyone's like, how do I do this thing out here? Like, how do I get this motivation if everything overwhelms me? And it's like, the question is not, you should not focus on getting motivation out there. It's like, you have to figure out like why everything overwhelms you. That's what you need to work on. And so that's like, it's a prime example of someone who wants to go. So remember, like in the stages of change model for motivational interviewing, it's like pre-contemplative, contemplative, planning, action. Everyone wants to jump straight to the action part, where it's like, you can try to set whatever goals you want to, but if everything overwhelms you, like, that's what's got to change. How do we understand why everything overwhelms you? Why, that's strange. Like, it's kind of strange that everything overwhelms someone. So the other interesting thing to think about is, if everything overwhelms you, it sounds like it's not 1,000 individual problems. It sounds like one problem that may have to do with you. And if we can fix that one thing, then, as we said an hour and a half ago, all boats will rise together. And that's what we oftentimes see. Okay. So, if y'all have other questions, we do have coaches that I think are going to be on our Discord, I guess at 4:30 Central Time on Tuesday and Thursday. I don't know if that's this week or next week. Maybe check the Discord. Do we know? Neff, are you around? Do you know when it is? Hannah? Anyone? Bueller? No. GG. Okay. So thank you all very much. Thank you guys so much for coming. I know I was a little bit distracted, so I apologize that things may not have flowed perfectly. I was juggling a few things that turned out to be more complicated than anticipated. But anything in terms of feedback or anything that y'all I could do better for tomorrow? Was what I was saying make sense? Like, y'all get what I'm saying?
Yeah, nothing comes to mind. But yeah,
Okay.
it was pretty clear.
Okay.
At least on my end.
Yeah, outside of the content, it looks like we went quite over time. So I want to, maybe make sure, should we expect to be here for the 2 hours?
No, I think that was just a lot like the Q&A stuff afterward. Y'all are welcome to bounce. I know a lot of people, like more than half the people have left. But
Okay.
I think the content we'll try to keep to 1 hour. And then if y'all want to hang around and answer questions, y'all are welcome to. But that's an excellent question, Stephen. Okay, cool. So thank y'all very much. And we will see y'all hopefully tomorrow. So take care.
Peace.
Thanks, guys.
All right, chat. Okay. Yeah, so we're going to pick up tomorrow. So tomorrow we're going to dig into intent and explain a little bit about how we, same time tomorrow. So it's going to be at 1 hour earlier from a stream perspective. And yeah, so I'm sorry that I was juggling, like I'm like in a Zoom meeting and managing Twitch and have a screen share app and got to switch scenes and all that stuff. So I'll try to get a little bit smoother at that. So tomorrow we're going to do intent. The next day we're going to do resistance. And the day after that we'll do action. Will this be posted on YouTube? I imagine so. But a couple of things to think about. So I saw there were 1 or 2 questions about, can I do this on my own? Yeah, you can do it on your own. But just to be clear, the purpose of what we're streaming today is not a guide for you to do it on your own. It's actually helping our coaches conceptualize so that they can work with clients. And, there is a DIY kind of thing that maybe we'll put together for y'all at some point. But I hopefully, like, even some of these frameworks and stuff will set y'all up to start doing some of this work on your own. Like, that's why we're kind of streaming it, right? So the frameworks hopefully will be helpful, but I do think that if y'all pay attention to the questions, like that's kind of the thing, is that a lot of people will have questions, they'll be like, oh, but what if I'm not actually good enough? And there are certain ways that you have to rethink that. Like you have to rethink that premise of I am not good enough. Why do you attach, at one point, does an action and an outcome in the world become a part of who you are? You know, it happens to humans, happens all the time. Right? So it not necessarily in negative ways as well, but like, you know, people will identify with, for example, being a cancer survivor, but is that really who you are? So this is something y'all have to be very careful about. And this is where, you know, y'all can check out, I mean, a lot of the stuff that if y'all were confused about, I'd really check out Dr. K's guide. So, you know, watch the video on Vedic psychology, watch the video on origin of motivation. We're starting from a standard here with our coaches where they're like pretty familiar with some of these concepts and they use them. So if y'all were a little bit lost there, check those out. And y'all can do it on your own. I mean, like we kind of said as part of the training, the goal of a coach is not, it's not that it can't be done without a coach. The goal of the coach and the value and the duty that they have is to help you get there hopefully faster and easier than you would be able to get there on your own. So what did y'all think about this in general? Like, how do y'all feel about us streaming like a coach seminar? Okay. So hopefully tomorrow, for a lot of people who are asking about like, you know, how do I do this on my own? Hopefully it'll be a little bit clearer tomorrow, because now we're gonna dig into the psychology and the science and neuroscience and spirituality and all that stuff. So that'll start tomorrow. So hopefully you'll figure out, you know, how can I figure out what I want? So that's like hopefully something that you'll get some info on tomorrow. I'm kind of confused about a question that I saw, though. Someone was asking, doesn't coaching and therapy unavoidably deviate from the truth? Isn't that a bad thing? Oh yeah, coaching and therapy unavoidably puts truth second to trying to make someone feel better. Isn't that bad? It's kind of a weird question. So first of all, why would you say that coaching and therapy unavoidably puts truth second to making someone feel better? Where are you getting the idea that coaching and therapy, the goal is to make someone feel better? And third question that I'd have for you is, why would you think that feeling better and understanding truth are not correlated? Because in my experience, I'd say that understanding truth is tightly correlated with like improving your life. It is a really fascinating question. I love it. Sure. So now people are saying, this is kind of fascinating. I'd love to have a discussion about this. So a couple of things. One is my perception is not always true. Yeah. So then the question becomes, so I would say that as a therapist and as a coach, I think helping people get closer to the truth is the best way to make them like feel better about their lives. Because, like you said, your perception isn't the truth. So I'd say that the role of the coach is to actually help you get closer to the idea of like truth, which begs the issue of, you know, is there an objective truth and all that kind of stuff. But I think actually what we really emphasize, so we have three major values in coaching: authenticity, presence, and compassion. So we tell people, like, if y'all caught the question about emotion, like, what should you do if you feel emotion when a client is doing something? You're authentic about it. We tell our coaches to be authentic. Don't be, false for the sake of like preserving someone's feelings. And y'all will understand this if y'all have been in group coaching, where we actually actively discourage politeness. We don't want people to be assholes. We want people to behave with compassion, but we want authenticity plus compassion over politeness. Because in group, like, people will call you out if you're BSing. Like, they'll call you out on it. So for people who are asking, is therapy a weaker option than coaching? What does it offer in contrast to coaching? We did like a whole segment, 20 minutes or 30 minutes at the beginning of stream, where you can go back and watch the VOD, where we literally go through like the competencies for coaches and like the definitions of like therapists and what therapists focus on. And you can kind of see the difference there. Do you have a service that helps people start therapy if it's their first time, such as finding a therapist that works for them and so on? Sort of. So we have, I think, 1 or 2 resources, maybe on YouTube, and maybe we've got like a 1-page guide to finding a therapist. What's interesting is that one of the goals in coaching, I'd say 10 to 20% of clients in coaching, we're trying to get a full number, actually wind up going to therapy, and they do so with the assistance and encouragement of their coach. So if you guys heard about, the intention, resistance, things like that. So a big thing that coaches will actually do is help people overcome the resistance to get them into therapy, if that's really what they need. So if a coach sort of decides, hey, this really seems like it's, really like the territory of a therapist, they'll actually try to help you get in to see a therapist. Yeah, so the Hilly's saying, I was enrolled in your program for a little bit and I felt that there was not enough of a prescriptive element to the sessions. It felt mainly like just a lot of questions and discoveries, but no calls to action on how to fix things. This is a great point. So I want to explain something to y'all. So if you come into coaching and you say, hey, tell me how to fix my life, how effective is the advice that this random person that you met an hour ago is going to give you? Like, how effective is that? When you get advice from other people, when people come up to you and say, hey, here's how you fix your life, how effective is that at altering your life? So this is a really common problem in coaching, and this is the big issue, is that people will come in expecting a prescription, but how on earth is that prescription going to be effective? It felt mainly like just a lot of questions and discoveries. That's the point, right? You have to have those discoveries first before you can get to an effective prescriptive process. So it's our belief at HG that the effective prescriptive process requires understanding the layout of who you are first. You have to understand what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are before you come up with a plan for change. There are a lot of people who don't like that. And so that's fine. There are other people out there who will, for the low price of, $650, will teach you in this online course how to put together your life and become successful. And it's great. I'm going to film it once and I'm going to sell it to everyone. It's an answer for everyone out there. Is you just watch the course. It's going to be awesome. It's if you're lost and you want to make, $100,000 a week, here's the answer. I don't need to know who you are. I don't need to know where you come from. I don't need to know what's in your head. I don't need to know what holds you back. I don't need to know what you're ashamed of. I don't need to know how you spend your days or who's around you or anything like that. I don't even need to know what country you're in. I don't even need to know how old you are. You could be 6 years old and it's going to work for everyone. It's going to be great. You can be 84 and living in the Congo without an internet connection. It'll work for you too, because I don't care about any of that stuff because I have the answers. So we have a society that gives us prescriptions without any kind of diagnosis. Do y'all see that? It's I get your frustration because you're coming in and you have a particular goal. And it may not be right for you. I'm not saying that it's right for everyone. It's just that's not what we feel is effective. When people come in, you talk to someone for 2 hours and they're what are they going to know about fixing your life? It has to start with the discoveries. It has to start with recognizing that some of your goals may come from false premises of understanding the world. But what if I'm not really good enough? What does that even mean? Like, how do you know? Like, show me, like, how do you measure whether you're not really good enough? Like, can I biopsy that? Like, what is that? Is it because you failed in a particular action? Well, what are the different reasons that you could fail in an action? Like, there's a differential diagnosis there, right? It doesn't mean that there's a core part of your being that's like prevents you from succeeding. So it's that kind of stuff, like it's questioning those fundamental assumptions and working through those fundamental assumptions that actually is like what coaching is all about. So I can understand if people, were looking for a prescriptive element and it wasn't there. I think that like this is where if you also look at kind of the sequence of coaching, like the prescriptive element tends to come in the latter half as opposed to the first half. So in our groups, we're rolling out a little bit more of a formalized model where like weeks 1 through 6, like there's going to be no prescriptions. And then 7 through 12, there are going to be prescriptions. Because it takes time to figure out who you are and like what you're good at and what's going to work for you. And then by all means, like start doing it. Yeah, when someone's saying just fix me already. So that's the problem. Is like y'all come in asking us to fix you when you ain't even broken. And then you get upset when we fail to provide what you were looking for. Right? But there's some dude on the internet that'll charge you $4.99 to fix you because you're broken. Oh, he doesn't need to know anything about you, but he's got the answer. Right? So I'd say that first of all, coaching does a couple of things. I mean, not coaching. This is like what we do. Like you don't have to do it in coaching. You can do it on the Discord if you want. First of all, you recognize that you're not nearly as broken as you think you are. You may feel you're broken, but you're not actually broken. Maybe you are. Who knows? But I'd say that most people overestimate how broken they are. Or what happens is that they overestimate how being broken now determines your future. That's what I'll stand behind. That's really the best way. You may be busted, actually. I'll give you that. But just because you're busted now doesn't mean you have to be busted a year from now or busted 5 years from now. Busted is not a permanent state. It's fixable. Second thing is, if you are busted, fixing you has to involve fixing you. It's not a generic answer. If you pull your car into the shop and you're like, my car's busted, like, does the mechanic just automatically change your tires? Do they just like automatically no, like they look at your car and they figure out what is it that's busted. Because you have to figure out what's busted before you can fix it, right? It's like, oh, like, don't worry, I'm a success guru on the internet. Like, I have the answer for you. It's like running being a mechanic and saying like, everyone needs new tires. You also see this a lot in the supplement industry, by the way. It's like there's no specificity behind what people are advertising, right? This thing will boost your brain power. It's awesome. I mean, there's evidence that some, herbal compounds and supplements and stuff will improve things, right? We know that people are vitamin D deficient, so take some vitamin D. We know that vitamin D deficiency also leads to like worse outcomes with like COVID infection. There's a lot of good data out there. So I'm not saying that these people aren't founded in some kind of science. What I'm saying is that the internet, with its one size fits all solutions, are like half the reason, because there's so many of them. Chat, you guys get that? There's like 1,000 solutions, 10,000, 1,000,000 solutions out there, and we're all still screwed. Going to the next thing, looking for the next solution. It's all just a big scam. Like the fundamental foundation of the way that this industry works is that it's not individualized. And so that's why the industry persists. So when you guys say Dr. K is a scam too, like, we're guilty of that to a certain degree. We try to do something about it, right? That's actually why we made Dr. K's guide the way that we did. Because I know it's kind of weird, but like, when you take an online course, it's linear. But I had this crazy idea that, oh, like maybe all of the useful information I have does not apply to all of the people. It's shocking. Maybe everyone doesn't need to start in the same place. Maybe everyone doesn't need to end up in the same place. Maybe people can be like individualized in the way that we share information. Shocking. Maybe we can give people choices. Oh, like if depression is your problem, maybe you don't need to watch the anxiety stuff. That's why we make it topical. right? Because that's how I work as a clinician. Because it's like someone comes into my office with depression, I don't like give them a lecture about anxiety. It's like, let's talk about depression. Okay. Who are you rating, chat? So here's your meditation for the week, okay? It's going to be a little bit different. So I shared it a little while ago, but if you guys are struggling with a particular behavior, okay? So health, you have to be careful about health issues. Like, for example, if it's like alcohol, I would go see a licensed professional about that. But take one kind of behavior that you're struggling with, and then pay attention to the desire within yourself as as the desire for the behavior increases. Watch what happens when you resist the behavior. Does the desire increase if you resist the behavior? And then if you give in, these should be behaviors that are safe to do. So don't do things that are like reckless, dangerous, damaging to your body. So I'd say like, eating a cupcake is a good example, or playing a video game or whatever. So observe yourself as you resist the behavior, what happens to the desire? Observe yourself as you give into the behavior, what happens to the desire? How long does the desire stay dormant, and how long does it take for the desire to come back? And then start to pay attention to what are things that, is it consistent every time? So every time you eat a potato chip, do you want another one right away, or do you want another one like an hour from now, or like what happens? So start by understanding and collecting data about your own internal process of the experience of desire, resisting desire, engaging in the behavior, and what that does to your desire. And just pay attention and see what you discover. Because I suspect that that basic understanding of where your desires come from, where they go, and how long they stay gone is going to be a very important part to like putting your life together. Because if you watch it enough, you may discover something very, very important, which is that no matter how many times you give in to the desire, its satisfaction will only be temporary. And the deeper that revelation sinks into your body, the easier it'll be to let go of these things. Because you'll begin to realize it's not even going to do what I think it's going to do. It's only a matter of time before it comes back. And do I want to be a slave of this thing? That's the conclusion I came to. Your conclusion may be different. Yeah, I implemented it myself. That's part of the reason I graduated from college. It's part of the reason that I got into medical school. It's part of the reason that I ended up where I am. Try it. Let's say you want to study, right? And you say to yourself, oh, the studying isn't going to be enough. So then ask yourself, pay attention. How does it feel to not study and and fail? And how does it feel to actually study and deal with the feelings of it's not enough? And then when you pass the class, how does that feel? To get a B instead of an A? And then ask yourself, which one do I want to give into? What do I prefer? If you do it with enough awareness, and we'll go into the neuroscience mechanisms of this tomorrow, I think, of how this process works. So pay attention to yourself. It's the only way that you're going to figure things out. Or you can pay, $59.95 for a monthly subscription to our wonderful course on fixing your life. Guaranteed to improve your life. It's going to be great. All you'll need to do is give me a kidney. Just for the price of one kidney. That's all we're going to need. Fix your life. Okay. Okay. Who are we rating, chat? I can't tell if these people are real or you guys are trolling me. I see a So Joe Mama, I've learned. Zane. Ligma balls. So there's a. Okay, so it looks like John Smith is a real person, but we're gonna raid John Smith, whoever that is. But I was sure that wasn't a real person. Y'all were trolling me, but we'll raid John Smith. Looks like he's playing some cool game. What is this? This looks dope. Last night in Amsterdam. This game looks cool. I have no idea, dude. I don't know who this is, but let's raid him anyway. Send him some love. See y'all tomorrow. So not Wednesday. Well, tomorrow at 11 a.m. Central. Provided that there's a hurricane that's going to be hitting soon. So provided that the hurricane doesn't interfere with anything. We're going to try to stream through it. So we'll see. Small chance that the internet is down.